the components in detail. So if I look at the control environment, if we are talking about, is a set of standardized processes and structures which every entity has for carrying out internal controls. And it's important that it comprises of the integrity and ethical values of our organization. Who drives this? The board and the senior management. You as senior leaders, it's required, like we said, to establish the tone at the top and establish expected standards of conduct and reinforce these expectations. Parameters which enable the board to carry out a governance or oversight responsibility need to be set into place, and people at every level of an organization are affecting internal control right from the top to the bottom. So we need to keep this in mind.
So very happy to see the fraternity join in. Welcome to the Blue Circle. I'll just begin while our attendees are joining in. It's such a big privilege and a pleasure to connect with everyone, and our distinguished keynote speaker, who is handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience she brings in. Thank you also to our distinguished audience for joining us, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are our members and are repeat visitors to our webinars. This is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online mode as well. For those of you who are new with us today, Blue Circle is the world's first sector-specific networking app for business leaders that's built in India. We currently focus on 20 sector communities such as e-mobility, automotive, energy, real estate, aerospace and defense, and many more. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. Along with our weekly webinar series and our digital publication, you will be happy to know that we have recently launched the first version of the Blue Circle app for leaders, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for senior leaders, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with over 15,000 plus like-minded leaders from India and across the globe, house high-quality curated content, and access business opportunities across these sectors. Those leaders among you who are interested, please just join us. I will share the link to the app in the chat section, and will soon be sending out invitations to new guests today. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's keynote speaker, Ms. Maheen Lampwala. She's the country CFO of Faurecia in India. She is responsible for the overall strategy and operations of the GBS functions, shared services. She oversees the accounting, taxation, controlling, treasury, and payroll. In addition to these, her focus is on digitizing financial operations and enhancing our productivity. In her previous stints, she has also handled roles in statutory and regulatory compliance, insurance, pricing, retail, and wholesale lending, and multiple ERP implementations. And for today's topic, Ms. Lampwala will be discussing automobile compliance and internal controls, leading to a productive workplace. Now I request Ms. Lampwala to please begin the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gautam, for the introduction. And before I start, I would like to thank the Blue Circle team for giving me this opportunity to present this topic. I would also like to thank the audience who has taken out the time to join this session. Thank you so much. I will just be sharing my screen. Just let me know when it is visible, please.
Yeah, visible.
Okay, I'm just putting it in slideshow mode. Just give it a minute, please. Okay, so today we are here to talk about internal controls in the automotive sector. As you can see, there is one small line I have put here. They are everyone's business. Just on the humorous side, we know that internal auditors, internal control people, make it their business to know everything about our companies, our business, etc. And they look at it with a very fine eye, what we are doing. Just to give you a very brief perspective of what we'll be discussing today, basically an overview of the automotive industry, its regulations, why do we need internal controls, its definition and purpose, what are the activities which are involved, some examples of internal control, components, and conclusion. So this is what I'll try to cover in the next 30 minutes very quickly. As you can see, this is the market scenario, not only in India, but mostly worldwide also. The automobile segment is covered into two-wheeler passenger vehicles, commercial vehicles, as well as three-wheelers, right? And then we have various sections within that. I will not delve too much into this. I think this is known to all of us. Okay. This sector is highly regulated and has a lot of compliances which need to be taken care of. As you can see, if you look at the automotive regulations in India, which have been set out by the Ministry of Road and Transport, we've got an Automotive Industry Standards Committee, we've got a Central Motor Vehicle Rules Standing Committee on Implementation of Emission Legislations. I think this we are more well versed with in the coming from the recent years. If I look at the regulatory compliances for any vehicle manufacturing industry today, we are talking about audit and surveillance checks which happen, import regulations which apply to us, some third-party certifications which need to be obtained, and conformity of production. Now, why internal controls? Why is there a need for internal controls? Why is the need for compliance of internal controls? As we have seen, there are a large number of legislations and there are multiple regulators. Multiple business locations, especially in the automotive industry, attract state legislations. Most of manufacturing entities have different units set up in different states, which attracts various state legislations. We have a lot of movement in this industry in terms of the staffing, and along with that comes lack of ownership or awareness at times on the functional staff side, and many of the teams are not aware about the stringent compliance requirements in the industry. We've got segmented compliance initiatives which are taken at various levels, because of which the complete picture is not available to many people at the top. In many of the organizations, we've got a lot of manual reporting, manual interventions which are there in order for the management to see the MIS in the way they want to see, because generally people use standard software like SAP most of the time for their accounting, and then for management reporting either a BI tool or a DW tool is interfaced. At times, if that is not available, then a lot of manual tweaks need to be done in order to see the reporting the way it needs to be seen. This is very time consuming, and at times this kind of manual intervention leads to errors. And when this happens, the internal controller comes into play. The legal environment currently in India is very dynamic. We also see that, when processes are updated, there is a lack of robustness on the updation of processes. Frequent changes which are happening at the legislation level as well as in the organizations leads to changes in the process owners as well as the internal processes. And that is the reason it is very important that we have the controls in place so that nothing fails, though it is not avoidable at times, but we need to try as much as possible to make our processes robust. Okay, coming to a very basic definition of internal control. It is a process which is designed to provide reliable assurance in order to achieve the objective. Now, what is the meaning of this? Or what is the outcome of this? Efficiency and effectiveness in operations. The main thing is reliability in financial reporting, and of course compliance with laws and regulations, which is of prime importance. If we talk about operations, we are trying to achieve effectiveness, efficiency, and obviously safeguarding assets. If I talk about reporting, reliability of the reporting while maintaining timeliness as well as transparency. And compliance is what we talk about, the compliance with the regulatory environment. As management, we have a fundamental responsibility to develop and maintain effective controls. So the internal controls is to be led top down. If the management obviously has not only has the fundamental responsibility, but they need to drive internal control top down in the organization to maintain efficacy of the processes. What is the purpose of internal controls? One main purpose is obviously that we need to achieve our goals. That is what we saw in the previous slide. Carry out management directives, right? Reduce surprises. Sometimes if the controls are not in place, we can be in for some rude surprises if there are some errors which come out of our processes. Increase the reliability of the information. If the processes are in place, obviously, as management, we will depend or rely on this data or reports from the reliability angle. Promote the efficiency and effectiveness, safeguarding assets, which we already spoke about, and comply with rules and regulations. Okay, these are some of the examples of activities which we see of internal controls in the automotive space. Some of them are very, very operational, but they are important. I thought it is necessary that we bring it out here just to just as a recap of what we have been doing over the years. When I talk about the sale of a vehicle, okay, if I start right from the order management process in an organization. So first an order is placed, then it is necessary to maintain or update the price and the customer master, as well as ensure that invoicing is done correctly, and then revenue recognition is done. Now, some of these may sound very technical, but it is important that at every step, the internal control check is placed. Like if I give an example, if the order has been given for an X amount, it is necessary that when we are updating the price of that particular customer master, the price is in consonance with the order price. Otherwise, there will be a mismatch, or there could be an error in the order booking. The invoicing has to be obviously at the same rate at which the price has been booked, and the revenue needs to be recognized in the same context as the invoice. So if you go to see in here itself, there were 4 to 5 processes which have been inbuilt, and it is necessary to have a maker checker in place in every process. Now this maker checker could either be a manual control, but more importantly, most companies are now moving towards system controlled maker checker compliances. So it's imperative that these controls or checks are built in. If I move to the next point, which is procurement to pay, that is, it's very necessary to plan and align along with the sales plan, maintain and update the vendor and material master, because we are procuring either goods or services, mainly goods here, and storage, receipt and utilization. So all these steps which we will carry out in the procure to pay process will help to ensure that the controls are in place. If I come to vehicle production and planning, it's necessary to be aligned with the sales plan. It's not like at the plant level, we can just go and produce whatever can be produced. It has to be aligned with the plan, right? Then the BOM creation, which is one of the main aspects in a vehicle production, and its alignment needs to be done with the material master. And monitoring the vendor performance at the shop floors is also important, so as to ensure that the costing at which the vehicle production has been planned takes place. There are no deviations. if deviations are there, then what are the reasons for these deviations? What are people getting into? We need to go to the root of the matter and check this out. Coming to capex management, which is capitalization of an asset. So right from capitalization of an asset to the various areas where we do fixed assets verifications and reconciliations. In many companies, this is done on an annual basis. In some, it is done on a biannual basis also, if the size of the assets is very big. And in many companies, the internal auditors follow a 3-year cycle rule. So basically, where the assets are verified plant wise over a 3-year period, so that they are because they are not able to cover the largest of the assets on an annual basis. It is also important to dispose or retire the assets which are either actually sold or not in use or obsolete or scrapped. So it's very important that this kind of a control mechanism is put in place, because actually retired assets or disposed assets should be removed from your fixed assets register, so as to ensure that your capex status is reflected correctly in the books. If I come to payroll, it's important first starting from the employee master, maintenance right to payroll processing and disbursement. Many companies generally outsource the payroll processing, but it's also important to have a third eye or an audit process on the payroll, especially on the tax calculations, etc., so that a control is maintained on the correct calculation and tax deduction of payroll, and of course attendance recording, which comes along with it. If I look at the regulatory, this is a very, very wide area we are talking about. So I will not delve into every area, but direct and indirect tax both have their equal roles to play. When we run a manufacturing industry, we are also have touch points in corporate law and Motor Vehicles Act. And when I'm talking about this, it is not merely just saying GST or TDS, but we also need to ensure that the right deductions or the right payments to the exchequer are done, so as to avoid any unforeseen inspections or concealment topics at a later stage. Finance and accounts, which is one of the most important areas, which I feel actually, which is at the core of internal control. So it's important here that the ledgers are reconciled appropriately, the books are closed, and provisioning is done in a correct way, because these have a material bearing on your financial statements. Coming to deliveries without proper contract. So imagine that a delivery has been done to a customer, but there is no valid contract for it, or there is no administrative department over here who is maintaining any PO. Then it is very difficult, because you will lose control of what has been delivered to the customer when. So it's very important that we maintain valid customer POs, and the sales administration department maintains the product wise listing of this. Sales price management update should be done in a timely manner, which is not later than 15 days from PO issuance, to ensure that there is no loss to the organization, especially. We've discussed this in the FAR. Physical assets which are missing, the count needs to be performed at least once in every 3 years at the minimal, though my recommendation would definitely be to do it on an annualized basis. Unauthorized access to the purchase module. This is a very important point, and a large scope for fraud if the wrong people have access to your purchase modules. This is generally granted only to your purchasing team members who are responsible to update purchase prices in the system, who have the rights to raise purchase requisitions and purchase orders, and it's important to see that no unauthorized or inadequate expense passes through. So this is these two are very important aspects. Coming to one typical example of goods received which are not recorded correctly or recorded incorrectly. A material along with the invoice and the supplier manifest is authorized by the supplier and is received at the plant. and the invoice and supplier manifest are cross-verified and approved by the PCNL leader. On the basis of this invoice, along with the supplier manifest and actual quantity verified, the PCNL leader prepares the GRN, which is a goods receipt note. Now, it is important that all these processes are followed internally at every level to ensure that the goods which are received are recorded. If they are not, then it is the I would say the duty of a gap leader to verify from the inward register that the goods received note is prepared, or if it is missed out, then it needs to be prepared and it needs to be corrected so that the invoices are correctly recorded, and if any differences are there, then they need to be monitored. In most of the plants, there is a three-way match, which is done to record PRs and POs. That's important to verify that the goods are in the system. That is, a PO is raised, goods received note is done, and then the invoice is raised accordingly. We also need to ensure that no duplicate purchase orders are generated against the same purchase requisition. This is very, very important for us. And also it is necessary to monitor the inwards of the goods and the detection of damaged material. So in the interest of time, I'm not going through every example, but if anybody has a question, it can always be addressed, or I could always share the presentation and you can go through and come back to me. Coming to some of the components of internal control, we all have heard that for people who are working in internal controls, they understand that there is a COSO or a Cube 5 cube on the basis of which there is an integration of the various areas of internal control. So all these internal control components have to work jointly for effective output. This is another way of looking at the COSO cube. There are various environments over here. I will move to the next, which discusses the components in detail. So if I look at the control environment, if we are talking about, is a set of standardized processes and structures which every entity has for carrying out internal controls. And it's important that it comprises of the integrity and ethical values of our organization. Who drives this? The board and the senior management. You as senior leaders, it's required, like we said, to establish the tone at the top and establish expected standards of conduct and reinforce these expectations. Parameters which enable the board to carry out a governance or oversight responsibility need to be set into place, and people at every level of an organization are affecting internal control right from the top to the bottom. So we need to keep this in mind. Coming to risk assessment. What is risk assessment? It is the identification and analysis of the risks which exist either in the organization or in the process. It's important from a risk strategy perspective that if there is an avoidance, then we should not proceed. Mitigative measures need to be put into place, and that is to improve the internal controls if there are any. Transferring of risk is shifting responsibility to an external party, like a third party payroll provider, where you're shifting your responsibility. Acceptance of risk is where you accept the risk and not move on, but you set further controls in place. And creation is seeking risk activities strategically to maximize the opportunities. Coming to some of the control components on the control activities, you've got preventive, detective, and corrective controls. So preventive controls is those which help the management to avoid the problems before they occur. Okay, so this is done in advance. We prevent the occurrence of negative events. Like, for example, SODs, or segregation of duties, which we call, is done in every organization to ensure that there is no conflict in the responsibilities which has been set up, and no two people can come together and make it a fraud conducive environment. It's important to have proper authorizations in place and adequate documentation. If I come to detective controls, these are the controls which help to which are uncovered after they have occurred. So it's a subsequent event. And this could be like when you're doing a variance analysis, or when you're doing reconciliations, when you're doing audits, you realize that, okay, things are missing, things are not tallying or matching. And then you get into the root cause analysis of the thing. And corrective controls are those risks which are detected, which then elicit a response or a corrective action. Example is, if there is a fraud which has taken place in an organization, you get to the root of the problem, how the fraud happened, why it happened, who led the fraud, what was the motive behind doing a particular action, and what action plan can be put in place, or risk mitigative measure can be put in place in order to correct the situation so that this does not happen again. If I talk about information and communication, it's important to give high quality information to the management to support the internal control system in the organization. There are different means of communication. We have policy and procedure manuals in most organizations. There are directives issued by the management or memoranda and bulletin boards. So it's important for the management to establish the expectations. Coming to monitoring activities, this is the last of the components, and it helps to determine whether internal controls are present and functioning as they were intended. Obviously, there'll be ongoing evaluations which will be built into business practices. We provide timely information, and these control checks are conducted frequently. Time needs to be set for the frequency. That's of importance. And there could be separate evaluations which are conducted periodically, or where there is a variation in scope, where the management wishes to see certain areas or certain perimeters. So these evaluations will sometimes reveal deficiencies and findings which need to be addressed or rectified in a timely manner. So this was more on the components. If no internal control is in place, I think we all understand that, then we are opening the door for a fraud, right? Because then you're actually activating a fraud triangle of giving opportunity, motivation, and rationalization to an external or an internal personnel to conduct this fraud. So it's very important that we have these controls in place. It will not only bring peace of mind, but I would say it also will enhance the productivity levels within the organization. So I would like to conclude on that note. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Lampwala. I'll just quickly move on to the questions. I know we're very short on time, so just quickly, we can just take out your time as much. Sure. So first one is, what are the specific components of internal control that must be addressed, and how do they affect the workplace's productivity?
Okay, so I think when Akshay asked this question, I just started on the components of internal control. We just saw there were 7 components of the internal control which were there. And, it's important that each of these 7 components are put into place. If you want, I can flash it again for you, Akshay. These are your 7 components of internal control. And it's important that each and every one be put into place. It's not so simple. You need a proper internal control charter to manage this so that your workplace productivity is managed.
Understood. Thank you. I hope Akshay also got the answer as well. I'll move on to Mr. Rakesh Malik. He's asked, how cycle time from the identification of a control violation until the violation is reported to the control or process owner be reduced?
Sorry, how cycle time from the identification of a control violation until the violation is reported? Okay. So first of all, it is important to identify that there has been a control violation, right? Until then, the cycles would run in a short, in the way they were running, either incorrectly or not. But once it is detected, then it is important to report them to the process owner immediately, and we need to go back and check that all the cycles which have been covered under the shortened time period are actually covered in the correct way. If not, what was the incorrect control in place, and that needs to be corrected. Also, we need to assess if there has been any loss, either on account of quality or on account of material loss which has come into place, and that needs to be assessed and presented to the management.
Done. Thank you. So I'll move on to the last question. How real-time dashboards empower organizations with a comprehensive view of the status of compliance-based risks across the company?
See, I think this is a very relevant thing. We are doing this at this point. We are trying to do it. We are trying to prepare real-time dashboards. So real-time is, at this point, we are trying to put in a monthly process. Okay, even if we are able to detect a non-compliance or a highlight of a incorrect process which has taken place, which has led to loss in the company, it gives us a month's time to correct, but this may not be valid in the case of plant. So in plant, it needs to be detected almost on a daily or a weekly basis, and it's important for the plant reviewer or the plant controllers who are there to look at the control processes almost on a real time. I would say, every week at least, the review needs to be done, so that in a plant process, no efficiency is impacted. So that would be that would depend from whether we are talking about a corporate or a plant. That way.
Thank you. I think Akshay has another question to that. He's asking, what are the best policies and procedures on internal controls compliance?
Okay, so actually this is a very broad question, because a best policy and procedure would be based on the organization's need, right? And also depending upon the size of the organization. If the organization is very small, for them, putting in a mammoth internal control procedures may not be required. But if the organization is big, if it's a big MNC or a big Indian company, especially manufacturing entities, then you will the management will need to see what is it that they want to come out of the internal controls. What is the output they're looking for? Merely highlighting that there has been a compliance risk, or they are looking for something beyond? Because some people just use it as a tool to know what are the risks in which areas. So is that going to be your mere process, or is it going to be something more? Are you going to look at better productivity coming out of that? Then you need to build a more broad-based process or a policy around it. So it would vary from company to company. That's what I would, and even from business to business as such.
Understood. So I think there are no more questions, so I'll just end it with a nice, happy note. Thank you very much, Ms. Lampwala. Such an insightful and engaging session, and a privilege to hear you. Our guests and I have been hooked on till the very end, and have taken home several nuggets. And thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining us and for staying till the end, and for always sharing excellent questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for giving your time and actually being to the end, being there till the end, because there are many people who try to move out early. So thank you so much for bearing with me. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.